All right. The second section that we're going to talk about is where do species actually come from? And I heard we were talking about this in class the other day, looking at how do you create new species through speciation? And so we're going to look at the scientific theory of evolution, how it explains how life on Earth changes over time, and also changes because of genes and genetics. We'll look at how populations evolve when genes mutate and give some examples of that as well. So, biological evolution by natural selection explains how life changes over time. Our biggest players in this section are Charles Darwin, which you guys hopefully remember back in the day from biology. Biological evolution is a process where Earth's life changes over time because of the genetics. It's always based on the genetics. Now, back in the day, Charles Darwin had no idea about genetics, but he knew that things were changing over time, so he gave this insight to natural selection, as well as Alfred Russel Wallace. Again, what did these two guys observe? Lots of different things. I'd like for you to read over this stuff in the section of the second section of 4.2 and take a look at what the contributions are of Charles Darwin. Obviously, he came up with survival of the fittest, but many other kind of natural selection laws or theories that he came up with, as well as Alfred Wallace. There's a tree of life. It's a phylogenetic tree, which you guys hopefully remember from biology, on the main kingdoms of the organisms on page 81, which we're going to take a look at next. So if you're following along with your CD, definitely take a look at this section. So 6 major kingdoms of species as a result of natural selection will be the earliest ones that formed. This kind of shows it millions of years ago are the prokaryotes, the eubacteria, the archaeabacteria. Eventually protists came along. They were our first kind of animal-like, fungal-like, and plant-like protists. And then plants kind of evolved from that, and funguses and animals as well, or fungi and animals as well. So fossils. Looking at fossil records that's one of our major key components is how we actually really learn about evolution and kind of proved it over time. Fossil evidence is physical evidence of ancient organisms, revealing what their internal structures look like. Fossil records can be incomplete, obviously, because a lot of changes happen at the Earth. Things just didn't die, and plus there's lots of things in the bodies of organisms that really doesn't fossilize well. So a lot of times fossil records can be incomplete because of a number of different reasons, but at least it gives us a little bit of a glimpse as to what happened in the past. This is just a look at one of the types of fossilized skeletons. This is of a herbivore that lived during the Cenozoic era. You guys will be responsible for knowing the different eras. We haven't talked about that yet, but you are responsible to know for that for the AP exam. But we're not going to talk about that right now. But this is just one organism and a view of a fossil. All right, so genetic makeup of a population can change. Populations evolve by becoming genetically different. Well, what kind of evolution is this? Well, if we're becoming genetically different, then it would be divergent evolution. If we are kind of dissimilar and then we're kind of becoming more similar as far as evolution goes, it's called convergent evolution. It's kind of like convening, coming together, diverging, kind of leaving or going apart. This should be a review for you based on your biology lessons back in the day. Genetic variations, your first step in biological evolution. You have to have mutations or some sort of genetic variation to allow these organisms to actually look different, serve different roles, and kind of change shape or look even. Occurs through mutations in reproductive cells. So all genetic variation really boils down to mutations. Accidental. Now, not all mutations are bad. They're all not good either, like an X-Men. But sometimes the right mutation is perfect for that exact time in the ecosystem or whatever is happening, the changes that are occurring, which allows that species to then basically evolve to what they are based on the biological or the environmental happenings of the time. So natural selection acts on individuals. So the second step is in biological evolution are the adaptations. So based on the genes that the organism has, they either are going to adapt to the situation, the changes that are happening in the environment, or they will not. So they have adaptations may lead to the differential reproduction, which means some organisms reproduce better because they're more fit for the given situation. Others might die off. So there's also genetic resistance, like bacteria, which is kind of breeds us the fear of hand sanitizers. A lot of people say, they look at hand sanitizer, that can be a dangerous thing because it says 99.9% it kills bacteria. But, there's billions of bacteria all over your body, all over the desk, all over everything else. So that 0.01%, that doesn't cover, is still like millions of bacteria. and those bacteria could become more resistant to the different alcohols or different whatever antibiotics that we're using in order to kill those. So that is kind of the danger there. But those organisms that do survive, that interaction or that exposure to to hand sanitizers will then live on, reproduce more, and then that would kind of lead to more offspring being more resistant to whatever antibiotics or hand sanitizers. So when the environment changes, which is kind of the other than the genetic change or the mutations, the driving force comes from environmental condition changing. When that change does come in the environment, organisms have to do one of three things. When we call them get mad, which you can see here. MAD. The M stands for migrate. They either leave the situation because they really can't handle it. They better get to a different spot that they can handle as far as their environment goes. The A stands for adapt, which would, if they had the genetics, if they have those mutations, then they would adapt. And then D stands for die, which means they didn't leave, they didn't migrate, and they couldn't adapt. So therefore, they went extinct. If that was the case, if it was a large scale environmental change, if it's a small environmental change in a given area, you might have more migration happening than death. But adapting is only going to happen for those species that have the mutations already built in that allows them to be suitable for that changed environment. This is just a quick picture of looking at how bacteria work and that differentiated reproduction. A group of bacteria looking at all different types. There's some normal ones. There's some resistant ones that are already kind of been exposed to some sort of antibiotic. And then most of them, the normal bacteria, die if you are given that antibiotic. Maybe one or two survive. Well, the genetics of the ones that are resistant obviously are going to live on. They're going to reproduce, and then it leads to a whole strain of resistant bacteria, like you've heard of MRSA before, which you guys watch the MRSA video hopefully every year for sporting events. So that's just one example there. All right, one case study on page 83 of your text today, or if you're looking at the CD on page 83, is how did humans become such a powerful species? Well, there's really three major adaptations that we have come along through evolution to have, and one of those is our strong opposable thumbs, which you can see right here. We've been able to grip things, be able to manipulate things with our hands a lot more than other species have, which has allowed us to do a lot of different things, build, construct homes, different technologies. So a lot of those comes from our strong opposable thumbs. We've been able to walk upright on 2 feet, which most organisms have not. So that allowed us to maybe quicker mobility, different types of mobility, allowed us from different things. And our biggest, probably one of all those three, is our complex brains, which allowed us to problem solve better than organisms, to find solutions, to invent, to be inventive, and to come up with ways of living longer, of adapting to any really environment that we're in, and be able to thrive and reproduce. So those are our major 3 adaptations that we've accomplished over thousands of years, and our biggest one, probably the complex brain. All right, adaptations to natural selections do have limits. So genetic change, again, going back to mutations, must precede the change in environmental conditions. Because if you don't have those genetics and you don't have those different features about you, then you're not going to be able to adapt to those conditions. Again, not everything is favorable. Not every mutation is favorable to the changing conditions. For instance, if a big cold spell came along, and obviously I'm not the hairiest guys. I have a little bit of beard hair, but I'm not big and burly. Those people who are big and burly, might survive very well. If I don't have those things, I'm not going to survive well. But if all of a sudden the environment changed or it was very hot, those people who were very adapted and ready to go would probably die off because they would overheat, those kinds of things. So just giving you an example of how genetic change must proceed, and it must be the right change in order for those environmental conditions to occur, in order for them to thrive in those environmental conditions. Reproductive capacity is the definition you might need to know. How many offspring the organism can have, and how often can organisms reproduce? So for us, depending on if you have some twins or triplets or quadruplets or whatever, it's usually about 1 every 9 months. Some organisms are a lot sooner than that. For instance, an oxalotl, which we have in our classroom, can reproduce maybe 3 or 4 times a year and lay that many clutches of eggs. which are up to hundreds. Again, they don't parent as well, and they might even eat their own offspring. But again, that's just showing their reproductive capacity 4 times a year and roughly about 100 eggs per clutch. So that's just showing you some different types of reproductive capacity. All right, so 3 common myths about evolution that everyone kind of gets confused about. The first of all, survival of the fittest is not survival of the strongest. So, for instance, if I don't work out very much, so obviously I wouldn't be, the strongest of them. But if I'm quick, if I'm faster than somebody else, if you have me and somebody else who's very large and strong, and a bear attacks, I mean, neither one of us is going to be able to, out-battle the bear probably. Maybe the stronger guy might have a better chance, but the person who's fastest who can get away might survive. So survival of the fittest isn't always survival of the strongest. It's survival of the best adapted, and that's really what it boils down to. Number 2 is organisms not develop traits out of need or want. It's mutation. It's random. It's not like, oh, bam, I would like to have gills because the world's going to flood, and now I'll be better adapted. It has to come prior to and really sheer by kind of accident. There's no grand plan, number 3, for nature or a perfect adaptation. So really, there's no perfect design of an organism. There's no organism that's going to outlast everything. Even the cockroach seems like it has outlasted everything for a long time. But there is no perfect adaptation because the environment's always changing in totally different ways all the time. So there is no real perfect one.